Welcome back to the Future Skills podcast. This week, my guest is Paul Mumford from Search Energy. Paul is responsible for a large workforce of smart metering engineers and has been involved in the energy industry for around 20 years. We're going to be getting Paul's take on the opportunities within smart metering that are still around and also the progression routes coming up in the future. Hi Paul, welcome to the Future Skills podcast.
Hi Dan.
Thanks for joining us today, it's really appreciated. Wanted to get you on really to discuss the smart metering sector and also the progression that's happening within the smart metering sector. Obviously Search are quite involved there, Search Energy, and I think a good place to start here would just be Search Energy, and how it all started for you getting involved in the energy sector.
So yeah, that's quite a long history. If I take it back, the 21 years this year that I've been working at Search. So wow. way back, I joined Search, which are historically and certainly at that point were a big recruitment business, and I joined to look after the industrial and construction arms of that business, both temp and permanent services. As the years went on from there, very quickly, the CEO of the company at that time was a great believer that to move up the value chain with clients, you had to perhaps offer a differential service that wasn't out there in the marketplace with your traditional agency suppliers. So we moved my sector, which was predominantly focused on energy and utilities at that point. I'd focused in on that within industrial. We looked to move that to an outsourcing arrangement with our clients as opposed to the traditional kind of agency transaction. So that's where we as a business act more like a subcontractor, certainly more towards a subcontractor than we do a traditional agency. We take a lot more responsibility for the engineers in the workforce, or way back as then it was meter reading before the world of smart really took off. So that was kind of how the division as it is now came about. It was born out of an industrial provision of temp meter readers, and obviously smart metering was going to cause that business to come to an end. So it was a natural progression for us to get involved in smart metering probably 7 or 8 years ago, and we've been growing in that ever since.
And you've got lots of smart metering engineers, haven't you, at Search Energy? How many have you got at the moment? Ballpark figure, how many is there? Do you know the exact numbers?
Yeah, headcount's just gone over 300. And it's the highest. In fact, I think last week was our highest headcount we've had since the beginning of the smart rollout. Obviously, we would have expected that to have perhaps happened last year. But we all know what happened last year, which threw a spanner in the works. So yeah, I think we're just a year behind where we thought we'd be, but so is everybody else in the marketplace.
Yeah, and it's certainly coming back now with a vengeance, isn't it? It's like, seems to be that all that time that's been missed, everyone's trying to pack it all in now as quickly as possible for the rest of this year into next year to get those numbers back up.
Absolutely. There's been a skill shortage in this sector since the day it started, really. As soon as it got any pace behind it, there was not enough engineers in the marketplace. And we were probably one of the earlier adopters of the training people from no background in the industry at all to be dual fuel qualified fitters. And we started that journey back in 2016 was our first one. So nearly 5 years of completing this type of training course, and probably 2/3 of our workforce ultimately came to us via that route over that period of time. And there's certainly been a big volume of people. Not all have stayed with the business, but a good number have, and see the value in the decision they took back then to join. It certainly has created some excellent career opportunities for people that were perhaps not clear on the direction they wanted to take, or thought they didn't really have, great opportunities ahead of them. So I think, it's been eye-opening for those people, and I still hear stories from early adopters, people that came on early doors with us that doing very well for themselves.
Incredible, really, that 2/3 of the workforce, new entrants, perhaps they were a butcher before, or worked in a supermarket, something like that. we've seen an influx recently of apprentices starting, and I go to see them on day one, and you see lots of different people who are not really experienced. Some people have never touched a tool before, but they learn so much, don't they, through the journey. And week sort of 18, 19, they've got these unbelievable skills, really, that I think on day one they can't believe they're going to get.
Yeah, I think we try to paint the opportunities as part of the assessment centre when we interview and look to make decisions on who we're going to hire into the business. That assessment centre has changed over the years, and particularly over the last 18 months with COVID, it's been a slightly adapted version of it. But essentially, at least a third of that is selling what the opportunity is, rather than us identifying the right people, which is obviously the other 2/3 of it. But at least a third of it is really making sure they understand what this opportunity is and what it could do for them. The reality is, once you've done that first year and you've invested your time and your efforts into that learning over the first year, your salary is going to jump by roughly £12,000, and that's massive. That's a mortgage. It's a very fancy car, or holidays, whatever everybody's personal preferences are to do with that money. But it sounds a bit twee to say so, but it is life-changing money, and it's been described back to me by people who've come along the journey as such. For example, people that tell me they've been able to buy a house probably 8 or 10 years earlier than they expected they'd ever be able to do that.
Really?
People got married and, on the back of it, being able to afford to do those kind of things. So, yeah, it is life-changing.
Yeah, no, completely agree. And I think as much as with the new entrant route, obviously there's lots of them to learn initially. There's also further progression, isn't there? It's not just you become a dual fuel smart meter installer. There's other things that they can go into. I think you've got a couple of examples where people have gone through different routes with you, haven't you?
Yeah, there's a few people I can think of within the workforce that joined in the earlier days that have progressed through the ranks to become team coaches. There's people who more recently have been upskilled to the commercial sides, or the like the 3-phase, for example, on the electric side, and medium pressure gas on the gas side. So, all the things we described at the beginning of this journey are coming to fruition for the people that came on board with us. I know some of it has been slightly delayed, unfortunately, by hiccups in the industry and outside factors such as COVID, but that is now starting, has started, and will continue to come to fruition for people who want to take that path. Let's be clear, not everybody wants to take that path. Some people are quite happy being an engineer, and that's great as well. We need plenty of people who are happy to be an engineer, but yeah, there is opportunities.
What would your advice be to somebody, because there are opportunities at the moment for new entrants, across the country. What would your advice be to a new entrant, male, female, who's looking, for a change, a new role? What would your advice to them if they're interested in getting into smart metering?
I think, if I were them, I'd seriously consider it. But they need to go into it with eyes wide open. The first year is hard. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot of effort required from you, over and above, because partway through that year, you go out into the field, fitting jobs on your own. That's where the scheme is designed. So you're kind of doing your day job, but there's still little bits of work you need to do to get to the end of your qualification and your apprenticeship grading. So I think people need to enter it with eyes wide open, that this is hard work for the first year, but you almost need to cross the calendar months down to the point you go into year 2 where, you'll get that pay rise accordingly. And that's what you're working for. The first year is a means to an end to what it brings to you going forward. So I'd certainly tell people that they shouldn't be apprehensive about having never worked in gas or electricity before and be worried about, can they do it? Because the training is thorough and well designed to be able to take people from all sorts of backgrounds. Clearly, through the assessment process, we try and identify people we think have got higher degrees of chances of being successful in it, and equally try and identify people who we think are going to struggle, because we know what has worked before, what hasn't, and where people encounter problems and challenges that are really not overcomable. So we'd be fair, and in our assessment process, we try to to identify people that would struggle with it. But people need to be open-minded and understand there's a lot of work involved. But if those two things that they understand and they're happy with, then it is a great career opportunity.
Well, I'm a firm believer in hard work pays off. And like you said, the first year, it's challenging. There's lots of information to take on board. It's all doable, but it is a challenge. And if you're 100% committed, it's it's a great opportunity. And I think just to reiterate as well with the opportunity, you get your tools, your uniform, your van, your gas qualifications, your electric qualifications, a sustainable role with progression opportunities that's in an industry that really, we thought a few years ago would have been where it needed to be with the smart rollout. But actually you look at it and think there's a good 3, 4, maybe 5 years left in smart metering at least, plus there's transferable skills into other sectors.
Yeah, I think that leads on quite nicely, I guess, to another area to discuss. Yes, whilst we're going to be fitting smart meters much longer than any of us, well, I was going to say much longer than any of us anticipated. That's probably not quite right. I think from early days, everybody anticipated this was going to be going still quite heavily now. Whether we anticipated it'd be 25, 26, whatever it actually kind of starts to get to a conclusion, I don't know, but it certainly wasn't ever going to be done by 2020 from early days. But you're right, there's quite a few years left in this, and certainly search, and I can probably speak for all the businesses that are involved in smart metering that have built a workforce, are not going to be building a workforce to see it suddenly, to want to see it just disappear. They're going to want to reskill operatives to whatever the opportunities are that come about over the next 3 or 4 years. EV is probably one of them. It's an obvious one that people might link because there is some transferable skills. I mean, there's still some challenges to overcome with the governing bodies regards to that. But as the pressure gets on that industry to start installing more points, and they, start to see the same skill shortages that Smart saw, which invariably will happen, then I think the governing bodies will become more open-minded about creating a route for what is probably a 90% good match of a person required to do an EV job. Create that route for that smart engineer to transfer, because 90% of the skills they need, they've got. It's just that, final bit. So I'm certain that route will open itself up in a bigger way in the years to come. And hopefully the timing of the EV industry growing and starting to accelerate will match. As it looks like it might right now to me. So again, as I say, it seems a logical pathway. I think there's all sorts of other stuff going to start coming around in the next few years. Maybe some of the stuff to do with boilers, the boiler replacement schemes under the air source heat pumps and things like that. So I think there could be opportunities around that sector. And I think there's probably opportunities that we don't even know about yet that are ultimately what will happen on the back of the smart rollout, because the smart rollout is only to gather the data on what people's usage is and then the pressures and demands on the networks. Ultimately, the next stage really has got to be to help consumers change their behaviours to become more efficient and actually to level out the usage on the grid. So the smart meters themselves don't fix that problem. There's energy efficiency measures needed and behaviours on the back of that need to happen to actually change things. So I do foresee a role for the smart meter engineers potentially in the future doing something connected to that as well. And I'm sure, because I've not got a crystal ball, there'll be things that we haven't even contemplated yet that the transferable skills will adopt to very simply. So, but yeah, I can certainly say that Search Energy are not building a workforce now just for the sake of 4 or 5 years. We intend that workforce to be reskilled and retrained and adapted to whatever we need to for the future.
Brilliant. I think when you look at the government, anything they put out at the moment on social media, there's a big hashtag there at net zero, working towards net zero with everything that they do. And I think the future skills of any workforce, there's going to be a huge focus on this net zero target of the government. So I expect lots of incentives around that and potentially new apprenticeship programs to support that as well. It's interesting with the EV. We had somebody on the podcast last week, Mike Gadd from Yes Electrical. And for me, I look at smart metering and it's difficult to put a percentage on it, but I would say we're probably about 75%, 80% into the journey. in terms of people being offered and installed a smart meter. And he said that with EV, we're about 3% into that journey. So if you think of that, we're only just dipping our toe into the water with EV, really, and there's lots to come.
Yes, I agree. I think to me, the EV industry sits at the moment as the proverbial chicken and egg, in that the industry wants almost more cars out there to justify really ramping up the charge points, but the consumer wants lots more charge points out there to have the confidence to go and buy an EV car. And there's all sorts of debates and discussion about, who's right, which side of the argument's right, which should go first. But ultimately, it's that kind of logjam that once that shifts and there gets a real pace behind it. I was speaking to someone else well connected within energy and utilities who reckons all it needs now is one mass market model that's affordable to a big enough proportion of people. And I'm not talking a £50,000 car, because that's just out the reach for most people. I'm talking, when you get these EVs back into the early 20s and under 20s, so they're comparable to reasonable family cars now, that creates the iPhone moment, the moment that, boom, it just goes. So, that's got to be coming. I see more models hitting the market. Still price point a little high for me comparatively. I think, it's not going to float everybody's boat quite yet, especially with range apprehension, charging network, charging availability apprehension. But we're getting closer. We're edging closer all the time. I mean, we've just hired a business development person specifically to focus on EV, knowing that, it might not be right now that we get a piece of business, but we are targeting that industry as a real big growth opportunity for us over the coming couple of years.
It's great. And like you said, there's going to be a moment with EV where it just really starts to come down the hill, because the train's on the track and it's happening. It's just that pinch point of, right, now we need to do something and it needs to scale up quickly. So I don't think it's too far away. Maybe another 12, 18 months, and it could be sooner than that, of course. But I think it's coming. In terms of opportunities at the moment with search, Paul, for anybody listening, is there any areas where you're looking for new entrants or for smart engineers at the moment in the country?
We're just finishing off the last couple of training courses we've got right now. We think we've still got some vacancies around the Yorkshire and North East area, but I fully anticipate that over the coming months we'll probably get some more opportunities down south. So I think what I would say is just get in touch, register interest. If there isn't anything right now, we'll tell you, but we'll also keep your details for when anything does come about, and then we can get back in touch at that appropriate time.
Brilliant. It's been great to have you on, Paul. And something I've just written down here, and sort of last question from me. I wanted to get you on to sort of, for the listeners really to learn a little bit more about search and search energy, the apprentices that have gone through you guys, and your involvement with the energy sector. But a question for you, I just wrote it down when we first started talking. 21 years, you said you've been involved at search, long time. What would you say is your most proudest moment in those 21 years?
I think the proudest moment was the first bunch of the apprenticeships that we ran for Smart getting their certificates. So, because when we first sat down and talked about this route to create engineers, it was all really great theory on a piece of paper, and it looked great. We all agreed, you guys at the training centre, ourselves, my financial people, all made sense. Everything made sense, but it was on a piece of paper. We then recruited the first bunch, looked like a good bunch of candidates who were really committed. We put them into a training course that ran. They went out in the field. They started doing jobs really well. I think when they got the certificates at the end of that first year, that to me was the proudest moment, looking how they'd come on board, developed, and how that model had well established itself by that point, because you've got to remember that they were the first group. There would have been probably 4 or 5 more cohorts behind them running by the time that first cohort got to the end of their first 12, 13 months and got the certificates. So I think that was a really proud moment, that the first bunch had got there, done the journey. We saw what that had done for their lives. They just got the pay rise, and we knew that we had a production line of 4 or 5 more cohorts following quite close behind them. So you're suddenly looking at having given a great opportunity to 60, 70 people, in a 12-month period, who were going to have fantastic careers ahead of them. So that was probably my proudest moment. It was really, for once, it was an opportunity that I thought all sides benefited from, but actually the candidate, the person we hired, the employee, probably was the biggest winner. Don't get me wrong, it's worked very well for Search, it's worked very well for our clients, it's worked very well for USG, but the biggest winner out of all of it has been the people who've got the jobs.
Yeah.
And that's not always the case when you're doing large scale projects.
I agree with you completely. I think, from my point of view, I went through the journey a while ago now, but 100%, 110%, it changed my life. I was working in the call centre at British Gas, and I went for a service and repair apprenticeship actually and got knocked back. And then I thought I'll go for it again when it comes up. And it just so happened that a smart metering apprenticeship came up, applied for it, really nervous in the interview, but I just remember just telling them how much I wanted the opportunity. And I wasn't very good with tools, wasn't hands-on with things. And I was one of the learners who, struggled a little bit going through. But when I look at, I trained in Hamilton actually for 6 months in Glasgow. And when I look at that, completely took me out of my comfort zone for 6 months, learned new skills, met new friends. I was doing my mentoring in London, which was like the first time I'd been down there. I just learned so much about life, and the job was just fantastic. I loved being sort of my own boss and looking after the jobs and the customers. It really is a life-changing opportunity. And it's so great that working with yourselves, that there's so many more opportunities out there, and we can change those lives going forward.
Yeah, I agree. We've not finished yet.
No, we haven't. Definitely not. Well, Paul, really appreciate you being on. It's been great. I've just seen the breaking news that you're not going to be signing Harry Kane, so sorry about that. But I still think you're going to have a good season at City on a footballing part. But thanks again. And that's been a Future Skills podcast.
Excellent. Thanks, Dan.
Big thanks to Paul for joining the Future Skills podcast this week. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, and we'll see you in the next one.